Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Susan Kaufman, and you are tuned into Attitude Magazine's ADHD Experts webinar series. We're starting back to school, at least here on the East Coast. It's been an incredible, long, and glorious summer. But those of us who are parents of teens, preteens, college students start contemplating what's ahead, which is the demands of schoolwork and the struggles that can ensue in many a household. How do we assure that our teens and our preteens do well without micromanaging them or taking away their independence? It seems pretty much like a formidable challenge. It is a formidable challenge. So today we're so pleased to welcome back Dr. Peg Dawson, who will talk about teaching preteens and teens independence without hovering. She will be talking about one of her areas of international expertise. She speaks all over the world, which is teaching children executive function skills such as planning, organization, time management, all without micromanaging them. Peg Dawson received her doctorate in school and children's clinical psychology from the University of Virginia, and she has worked as a school psychologist for many years in Maine and New Hampshire, as well as for the past 20 years at the Center for Learning and Attention Disorders in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where she specializes in the assessment of children and adults, both with learning and attention disorders. She's the author of some wonderful books, which I really recommend to you, Smart But Scattered and Smart But Scattered Teens. Please visit her website. It's smartbutscatteredkids.com. So with that introduction, let me turn it over to Dr. Dawson, again, with our great thanks for her time today.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here, and I have to say that I love Attitude Magazine. Every month I see really useful pieces of information, and it's set up in a way that's very reader accessible, and invariably has a topic that I've been thinking about. So I know you didn't ask me to put in a plug for Attitude, but I will.
We appreciate it.
Okay. So what I'm just an advanced organizer for what I'm going to talk about, and hopefully I won't spend too much time, so I'll have lots of time for questions. I'm going to sort of begin by talking about two aspects of adolescent development, what's going on with the brains of teenagers, because things change dramatically at that age, and particularly as they relate to executive skills, and I'll briefly define executive skills. And then that understanding is important because by the time kids hit adolescence, for parents who are trying to help their kids develop better executive skills, they really bump up against some of those huge developmental tasks of adolescence that make it difficult. So the advice we give to parents of middle school kids and parents of high school kids tends to be different than parents of elementary kids just for that reason. And so then we'll move into communication strategies, how to communicate with your teen or preteen, and then how do you motivate them based on, again, going back to teen development and what motivates teenagers. And then finally, I'll talk about what we're really working for. I mean, I talk about 11 different executive skills, but by the time kids hit middle school, high school, to me, there's one that sort of is preeminent, and that's where I'll end up. So let's start by talking about the teen brain. And this is what we know from neuroscience research, that the teen brain is primed for acquisition of new skills, driven to explore new experiences and more intense social and emotional relationships, and driven for better or for worse to take new risks. This is particularly true. I mean, all human beings, these are drives that move us, but they become particularly prominent in teenagers. So even teens with good executive skills struggle at times with behavior governed by these skills because they are not yet securely developed. So what do you have as a result? What we call a Jekyll and Hyde-like behavior. 1 minute they're cool, calm, and rational, and the neuroscientists call that cool cognition, and the next minute they're screaming, emotional, and rational, and the neuroscientists call that hot cognition. And that, actually, they break down executive skills into cool and hot kinds of executive skills. So going on to what are executive skills, they're a set of brain-based functions that help teens to regulate their behavior, set goals and achieve them, balance wants and desires with needs and responsibilities, which is not easy, and then balance the desire for independence with the need for guidance. And again, if you have kids at this age, you know that balance piece isn't always working out real well. They tend to emphasize one over the other. More often they're focusing on wants and desires and forgetting the responsibilities or the desire for independence without recognizing that they're really not ready yet to be independent. So people have different ways of defining, categorizing, labeling executive skills. If we could go on to the next slide. In the work that my colleague and I, and my colleague is a guy named Dr. Guer, and he and I have worked together for many years, we've defined 11 different executive skills that we think are absolutely critical to school success and ultimately life success. And you can see them there: response inhibition, working memory, emotional control, flexibility, sustained attention, task initiation. You can read them yourselves. But I think that the point is, for the most part, we think the labels we've come up with are almost self-explanatory. We do have definitions for them, but we think a lot of it, just looking at the label and you have a sense of what we're talking about. Many of these are skills where, in the absence of these labels, we're calling kids either lazy or oppositional, when in fact they may have problems with task initiation or sustained attention. That often gets called lazy. They may have problems with emotional control or flexibility. That often gets called, oppositional or whatever. So we think it's much preferable to identify the problems these kids are encountering as executive skill weaknesses, as opposed to some of those more pejorative kinds of terms. Another thing, going on to the next slide, that you should understand about executive skills is that these skills begin to emerge shortly after birth. The brain is hardwired for all of these skills to develop, but they take 25 years to reach full maturation. And that's in normally developing brains. Kids with ADHD, Russ Barkley has said for years, these kids lag about 30% behind typically developing peers. So think what that is. That means, a 12-year-old is more like an 8-year-old. A 15-year-old is more like a 10-year-old. And I remember Barkley many years ago saying that he would not give a self-report ADHD rating scale to anyone below the age of 30 because he didn't trust their answers. So these do take a long time to develop. And when we think about middle school, in my experience from working with these kids, is the gap between what parents and teachers expect of kids and what kids' brains are able to do is widest at middle school. It tends to close a bit at high school, but middle school is the most challenging. Okay, so with younger kids, they're easier to work with because they're more willing to have parents work with them to help them develop executive skills. They're more willing to listen to them and to try out strategies. But by middle school, it's a whole new ballgame because one of the basic tasks of adolescence is to break away from parental authority. Which really leads me, and they also have this sense that they know better than their parents, which leads me to the next slide, which is my favorite quote of all time about adolescence. Mark Twain once said, "As a boy of 14, my father was so ignorant I could hardly stand to have the old man around. But when I got to be 21, I was astonished at how much he had learned in 7 years." So that's what, if you've lived through this, or if you're in the process of living through this, I've lived through it. I have two sons in their 30s, so I know they do emerge from the tunnel somewhere in their 20s, and it's a relief to get that relationship back at that point. Okay, so with that as background, let's move on. Understanding what's going on with kids and how they change at adolescence. Tips for working with teenagers. Pick your battles is a huge one. You don't have to fight about everything. I mean, there are times when you should walk away. I mean, I was working with a kid yesterday when he got out to the car and I told the mom I needed to meet with her for a few minutes. He wanted to put the top up on the convertible. She didn't want it up. She basically walked away from him, which is one way to pick your battles. She just left him there. Other ways is to decide not to turn something into a fight. Many of these suggestions, by the way, are art more than science, and so you have to feel your way along. The better you know your kid and the better you know yourself, the more you're going to be able to apply these strategies. Using natural or logical consequences. I mean, if your child is building up a huge monthly cell phone bill because of texting, you can have a consequence for that. There's a natural consequence for that. Either they pay for the cell phone bill or you find out ways, you take steps to limit the amount of cell phone use. That's a natural consequence. Making access to privileges contingent on performance, which means that if you do this, then you'll get that. If you can get all your homework done, then you get to spend, half an hour playing whatever that video game is you want to do before you go to bed, or you get your phone back to text your friends. Be willing to negotiate and make deals. I mean, this can go overboard, but again, being able to respectfully understand where your kid is coming from in terms of what they want, and being willing to negotiate. My colleague Dick grew up with a father who was a labor negotiator, and he got that down to an art. I mean, he really saw it as labor negotiations in a sense. Involving others when you can, tutors, teachers, guidance counselors, coaches. This is really important. I think a lot of us feel like we should, as parents, we should be able to do it ourselves. There were times in both my kids' lives where I sent them off to someone else for a while. My older son with an attention disorder, I haven't had him spend some time with my older brother, who was a successful adult with ADD. My younger son, I thought he needs to see a different kind of role model. I sent him off to a good friend of mine from college, just to spend some time with them. But being able to access other people to help you don't have to do it all yourself. When I say built-in verification, there is a tip. That means when you make deals with kids or you make any kind of behavior contract, you can't take the child's word that he's following through. You usually have to have verification. My colleague Dick, when he was struggling with his son in high school about was he doing his homework or not, every Thursday night he emailed every parent, every teacher his kid had and said, could you let me know whether he did his homework this week? It was a simple one-way email. All the teacher had to do was hit reply, but that built in the verification. And then working on positive communication skills. This is tricky, and if you can go on to the next slide, there are some suggestions for which comes from a book by Arthur Robin, which just really contrasts what happens when families are not communicating well and how you can replace that. So if your family does this, call each other names, try to do this instead, express anger without hurt. If you interrupt each other, take turns, keep it short. If you get defensive, listen, then calmly disagree. I think those are just good things to remind yourselves. I'd probably want to post something like this on my wall at home or near the kitchen table just to remind me that, this is the way good communication takes place. Also, in terms of communication strategies, the more you can ask questions more than you make suggestions. The questions may end up sounding like suggestions, but it makes sense to just get as much information from the kid as you can. So what do you have to do for homework tonight? And when are you planning on starting that science project? Do you think you've left enough time? Do you know how long it's going to take? And again, keeping the emotion out of it so that you're walking the child through the process of thinking about something that they may not have thought about. And questions do that a whole lot better than suggestions. And then using language that supports your teen's executive skill development. What's your plan? It's funny, when my son came home from high school, starting in middle school, every day when he came home, I got him through middle school and high school by asking him 2 questions at the end of every day. What do you have to do? When are you going to do it? Those are the 2 questions that got us through high school. And an alternative to that is, so what's your plan? And that's a great question to ask when a kid has this totally unrealistic idea of what they want to do or how they want to spend their time or whatever. So what's your plan? Do you have a strategy for that? Tell me your schedule. When do you plan on starting? How will you remember? Those are all ways that sort of put it back on the child to be thinking about the answer and therefore using their own executive skills rather than either relying or resenting the fact that you're using yours to manage them. Now moving into sort of motivational strategies. Here's what teenagers want. These are 4 things in addition to the latest video game system or more tangible reinforcers. But what they really want is having the chance to do what adults do, making their own choices and decisions, having their opinions valued, and deciding what rules will apply and how. Now, obviously there are limitations to all of those, but if they feel they're an equal partner in these things, that they have some input, and that ultimately whatever their input is going to lead to negotiation as opposed to sort of hard and fast rules, that helps the whole process. And going on to the next slide, what parents can do to facilitate motivation: be prepared to negotiate and compromise. Convey that your intention is to help the teen accomplish something beneficial to him or her. The more we can focus on what the kid wants and find some way to make that possible with a positive outcome, both for the kid and in terms of moving forward in terms of executive skill development, then that's using motivation at its best. Focus on how desired change will boost the teen's independence. So once you've done X, Y, and Z, that means that you've shown me that you're responsible, and then you'll get to do, that other thing that you want to do. And then be clear why it's important to address the problem. So that, again, going back to clear communication, here's what concerns me about what you've just said. Here's what I want to see happen. Here's my goal for you. What's your goal out of all of this? So those are ways to carry on that conversation. people have mixed feelings about the use of sort of reinforcers, incentives, rewards. Our feeling is around executive skills. The key piece for kids in terms of executive skill development is practice. The more they practice any given skill, the better they get at it, and the less effortful that skill is. And so there are times when we will say, yeah, we're going to build in a reward. Because that will encourage the child to practice. I've set up incentive systems where kids earned points for getting grades of B- or better on tests, for handing in homework, for writing down their homework assignments. The points could be accumulated and traded in for whatever they wanted. But what that got the parent was the kid practicing the various skills. What that got the kid was the ultimate reward at the end of the process. If you're doing that, though, you have to ensure the economy is fair. Usually when these things don't work, it's because parents are asking the kid to do too much for too little payoff. And so you have to keep that in mind. And also to understand that long-term goals require short-term objectives and matching incentives. I mean, one strategy that does not work, especially with kids with ADD, is promising to pay them for getting A's on their report card or any other grade for that matter, because that's a long-term goal. To get from the beginning to the marking period to the end of the marking period in order to earn the goal, most kids cannot see that far in advance. And so that's why when I set up incentive systems, it's more based on daily behavior and that will lead to that long-term goal of better grades on report cards. Another, basically in terms of setting up incentive systems, they should be able to earn the reward 70% of the time, or they should be able to earn 70% of the possible points or whatever. If it's less than that, that means the demand is too great or the incentive is not powerful enough. And one way to gauge whether or not in addition to whether or not they're achieving the reward, the other thing to gauge is how hard are you working and how hard is your kid working. If you're working harder than your kid, then clearly the system is not doing what it should be, because you want the kid to be working hard or to be persisting with whatever you're working towards. And then limiting the freebies. The most challenging kids I work with are the kids who get everything all the time without having to work for it. And then I have to talk with the parents to say, we need to limit screen time, we need to limit video games, we need to limit access to cell phones. Because first of all, they all get in the way of good study habits. But second of all, they're incredibly distracting, and there's a good reason why kids shouldn't be spending all their time on that technology. And then finally, the executives, by the time kids hit middle school and high school, the executive skill that I tend to focus on is goal-directed persistence. And that is, it's a late developing executive skill, and I should qualify everything by saying that I see a lot of parents of 8th graders who sit in my office and say, doesn't my kid realize that how he's doing in school now is going to affect what college he gets into in 4 years? No, he doesn't, because he doesn't have goal-directed persistence yet. And when we as parents think about goal-directed persistence, we think about doing well in school in order to get that goal of going to college or whatever post-secondary plans there are. But that may not be the best way to build goal-directed persistence. It may be better to start with something the kid really wants. I saw a kid a couple of years ago who, his parents were at their wits' end. He was not handing in homework assignments. I mean, he was passing all his classes, but his academic record was not particularly impressive. And they were feeling like this kid is in serious trouble. But when I talked with them, this kid had actually, he was into lacrosse at the time that I talked with his parents, and he had actually built an entire lacrosse field in his backyard according to regulation. He put limestone down to show the boundaries of the field. He'd put the goals in right; they were regulation. He even put in lights so he and his friends could play at night. And I said to his parents, "You know what? That's goal-directed persistence." And now let's see if we can figure out how to get him to apply that to school. It's something that you may not see right away, and that's why my first recommendation there is model it yourself. If your child sees you persisting over time to achieve a goal, that can make an impression on him. You may not hear it at the time, but I think you'll hear it in their mid-20s if you model that behavior. Help him or her set up and achieve little goals. They add up over time. So something the child wants, it won't take very long, but just keep working at it. Praising effort. much more than praising kids for being smart or praising kids for getting things quickly and easily. You want to praise effort. Wow, you stuck with it. You figured it out. I can't believe how hard you worked for that. Nice goal-directed persistence. You can even use that term. And then, as I say, whenever possible, emphasize your child's goals, not yours. That's a really tough one. And obviously, there's a mix involved there with some compromise on both parts. But what I've discovered with kids, especially kids with ADHD, is that if they can get goal-directed persistence, they will use that goal to overcome other executive skill weaknesses. So they may be lousy at task initiation, but if the goal is important enough to them, they will start it. They may be lousy at sustained attention, but if the goal is important enough to them, they'll stick with it long enough to get it done. So that's why I think it makes sense to talk with kids about goal-directed persistence and to see if you can work on it. So now that you've heard all that, you have no problems, right? Go ahead.
Goal-directed persistence is a great concept. I don't think I'd ever heard that before. As soon as you said, ask questions such as, what's your plan? I thought to myself, and I had a thought, and immediately 3 people posted it, which was, what do I do when they say they don't have one and they just look at me blankly? Or what happens when a child says, I don't know? What do I say?
Yeah, then I would say, well, let's make one together then. What do you think we need to do first? So, and that's perfect because that leads into that sort of collaborative problem solving that you're not giving the kid the plan, but you're saying, let's make one together. And so in the back of your head, you may be racing ahead of them thinking, okay, if that's what he wants, what would a reasonable plan be? And so you could start, again, I always start with whenever I can, open-ended questions. What's your plan is an open-ended question.
Okay.
Where do you start is an open-ended question. If they can't answer that, then you can say, well, here are a couple of options for starting. Which do you think might work? Or do you have another idea? And so then you can give them sort of forced choice, or you can feed them ideas. But again, and this goes back to questions more than suggestions, anytime you feed them an idea, the next question is, do you think that would work for you?
That's great. So rather than just say, why don't you try this, why don't you try that, say, here are some ideas. Do you think this would work? Sort of try engagement would seem like a key part of this.
And another thing that I think parents don't realize how powerful this is, but I hear it from kids a lot, is the stories that parents tell about their own adolescence and situations they had. And I've heard the same thing about teachers. When kids tell me about things that have gone on in class that they like, the stories they remember are teachers saying, well, when I was a kid, this is what I encountered and this is how I handled it. So that's another approach.
Okay. Here's a good question. What's an example of a specific goal? Because you correctly, I think, identify that a long-term goal isn't right, and also that the goal should be a goal that resonates with the child and not the parent. Can you give some examples of goals that you've seen work in your practice with families?
Yeah, I mean, in the early stages, if the kid's not ready to think about school-related goals, then things they want to save up money for. And so, it's something they want to purchase, and you may be able to help them in exchange for, again, you can tie that into school-related behaviors if you want, or keeping their bedroom clean or whatever. One of the things that we have that I use in my practice, and it's in one of our books, is we have a sort of getting to know you survey where we just ask kids about how do you spend your spare time? What talents do you have? What personal qualities do you consider to be strengths? What area of skill or knowledge would you like to become expert in? And that last question is very interesting because that will, and we give kids examples. I say, we're not looking for just school stuff. If you'd like to become an expert in video games, if you'd like to become an expert in horseback riding, whatever, if you use that kind of information to say, gee, I wonder if there's a goal we could relate to that. So a girl who loves horses, can we build in a goal for taking horseback riding lessons? So start with whatever they're interested in. If it's around school-related goals, though, there are some things that you can if kids are willing to do it, that you can set as goals that are trackable, so you'll know whether or not they've achieved it. Things like I'm going to improve my homework completion. And teachers keep track of what percentage of homework gets handed in by kids. In fact, so many of these schools now have, online web portals where parents and kids together can track grades on tests, grades on quizzes, homework completion, missing assignments, that kind of thing. So improved homework completion, increased the number of homework assignments handed in on time, improved grades on homework assignments, improved test or quiz grades. All of those are things which, as I say, a lot of schools, parents can track that through their web portal. If that's not available, then weekly emails with the teacher is a way to track that as well. But I think rather than saying, okay, I'm going to get all A's in every subject, take, for instance, if we're making a school-related goal for a kid who's pretty turned off to school, is there one subject we can focus on? Within that one subject, is there something that you think you could improve on? Very often, I will ask kids in my practice, so what kind of grades are you earning now? What kind of grades would you like to be earning? All right, let's take one of those subjects. So you're earning a D in Spanish now. You want to bring it up to a C+. What do you think you have to do differently to bring that up to a C+? And I remember asking my son that when he was a junior in high school, and he said to me, do my homework? This was 6 weeks into the marking period. I had no idea that he had not done any of his Spanish homework until 6 weeks into the marking period. So,
right. A question about music. What about the ADHD kid who says he needs music while he does homework? I think that's an interesting one. I mean, we have published articles and heard from experts who believe music can help ADHD kids focus.
And I fall into that category.
Yeah.
So parents are always asking me that, and they always ask me in this tone of voice, so what do you think about my kid listening to his iPod while he's doing his homework? And, I know they want me to say, no, that's a terrible idea, preferably in front of their kids so their kid will hear it from the expert. But I've just had too many kids tell me that actually and you may need to negotiate with them about the kind of music, but what music does is it actually can act as white noise to screen out bigger distractions. Right. And that's, my son with ADHD tells me, I can't listen to music with lyrics because then I start paying attention to the words. But I listen to instrumental music, and that helps. So, and if you're at all not sure, you can run an experiment. Have him do his math one night or for a week, listening to his iPod, see how long it takes him to finish the math and how many mistakes he makes. The next week, have him do his math without listening to the iPods, see how long it takes, see how many mistakes he makes.
Right, right. Here's a suggestion from someone listening in. She says that she uses brainwaves, an app, instead of music, and it really helps, even more than music, to sort of create that background noise. That's an interesting idea.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it is an interesting idea. Yep.
Just before we finish with screen time, what about the non-school year, summer, and what about the more general issue of that a number of parents have posted of just not being able to get their kids to go outdoors and sort of to be motivated to do more than one thing, which is screen time, basically.
Yeah, that's tough. And in the same way that you can give them a menu of chores to do, you can give them a menu of other activities. And you can do a one-to-one thing. For every 30 minutes you're outdoors running around, you get 30 minutes of screen time. Or if you sign up for this recreational activity, that'll get you so many minutes of screen time. That would probably be the way I would handle it. But I think we just need to make that message to kids that spending too much time doing any one thing is not good for the brain.
Right.
Whatever it is. And so this is your effort to give them, multiple ways to stretch and exercise their brains.
Okay.
As well as their body.
Can you repeat the name, please, of the book? What was it?
Screen Smart Parenting.
Screen Smart Parenting. Is that new? A new book?
It came out last December. I know it did. I gave it to both I now have grandchildren. I gave it to both my kids for Christmas presents.
Smart Parenting. That just seems like something that all of our readers at Attitude would definitely.
Yeah, you may want to take a look at it and do an article about it because I think it might be useful. Yep.
Okay. Holly says, organizational skills during the school is a struggle. And getting the homework to come home is a struggle. How do I help with executive function skills during the school day? Well, there's a tough one. Yeah, you can. Right, you can. Right.
Yeah,
good luck with that one.
It's a really good question because I see so many parents are so frustrated with that. They cannot. And I had a parent who told me every week on Friday she went to school and cleaned out her kid's locker with her. And she said the school hated her for it, but she felt it needs to get her locker clean. But obviously you can't sit in class. So if it's really an issue, then your only hope is to have a conversation with the kids, either the kids' teachers, to see if there are things they could do, or find one teacher, guidance counselor, coach, someone in school who could work on that with the kid.
Okay.
But to be honest, and there you may want to push this, because for the last probably 4 or 5 years, in my seminars on executive skills, I have been using an example of a whole school organizational system. It was actually developed by a assistant principal of a school in Salina, Kansas, and he gave me the PowerPoint slides to demonstrate the organizational system. He simplified it. It came down to 5 steps, but the beauty of it was they introduced it to kids at the beginning. It was a 2-year junior high school, beginning of 7th grade. They kept that system in place until the end of 8th grade, and those kids learned the system. And when the whole school was using the same approach. And the interesting thing is, I first started talking about it, but in the last couple of years, I've been saying to my audiences, so does anybody have a kid who goes to a school with this kind of system? And any number of people raise their hand, and I say, so how does it work? And more often than not, the answer is, it is great for parents.
Yeah. Well, that's so interesting you say that, because I have 5 or 6 questions here from people who say, how do I do this? I have ADHD and I find it really difficult to get organized. Or one person who says, my spouse has ADHD and is addicted to his screen. So how do I put in place a system? Someone else just wrote, parents need to be outside and off the screens too.
Yes,
it really makes sense. Yeah, that it's really for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. But
on the home, sorry, go ahead.
Well, let me just talk about parents with ADD or parents with spouses with ADD. I don't want to say this just to plug my book, but I think it'll be really helpful. We have a book coming out. It'll be out in December or January for adults on executive skills, called The Smart But Scattered Guide to Success. And we basically take the same principle. If any of your audience is familiar with the books we wrote for kids, we take the same principles but apply it to adults. And it's basically a self-help book, but we have a chapter on executive skills in the home, another on executive skills in the workplace, and another on executive skills in relationships. We've created this great test so that partners can see, which executive skill strengths do I have, what does my partner have.
We'd love to have that on Attitude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So look for that, because that's one way.
Can you repeat the name of that, Peg?
Yeah, it will be called The Smart But Scattered Guide to Success.
Okay.
And you may even be able to see it up at Amazon or at Guilford Press, which is our publisher. I think they've got a press release on it now. But I think that will help. I think the other advice I give to adults with ADHD is you got to be kind to yourself. And you got to make choices. I mean, I don't have ADHD, but I know with my son when he was in high school, I gave up on room cleaning.
Right.
Because I just couldn't manage that. And, I didn't give up on it completely, but once a month I would say, okay, we got to get the room clean, as opposed to every day or every week. So I set priorities, and I just acknowledged there's some stuff. I mean, I'm terrible at organization as well, so that was partly why I gave up on it. He could look at me and say, you're better than this.
Okay, yeah.
Just
we have a post here from Renata. Everyone's ADHD in our household.
So hopefully,
this is the common issue.
Yeah, but hopefully everyone in Renata's household also has a good sense of humor, because
exactly.
That's what you do.
So that book sounds like it's a definite keeper. Yeah. Eleanor says, my 15-year-old daughter is an artist and she loves to doodle during class. If the teachers are okay with it, is this okay? Oh, man, I couldn't have got through school without doodling.
I was going to say, me neither. Me neither. And there's some great research to show that kids who doodle attend better and retain information better than kids who don't. So, whenever about once a year, I see a kid who says they get in trouble for doodling in class. And whenever that happens, I want to pull out my graduate school notebooks and say, here, take these in and show them.
Take a look.
Yeah, because you'll see doodles in the margins. When the professor wasn't saying anything worth taking down as notes, I was doodling, because that was the only way I could sort of stay alert. So, doodling is great.
I also found knitting in college.
Yes.
And I knit my way through college, which, I was it's another form of doodling, really. Just
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, Gina, I firmly believe that as an ADD parent married to an ADHD spouse, that our daughter must learn how to use a schedule to-do list every day. Do you agree? And how early do you start with planners and to-do lists? And
I love to-do lists. I mean,
the best.
Yeah, and I think in the beginning, if kids aren't well, because the problem with kids with ADD is, first of all, they think their working memory is way better than it is, right? So they're always telling me, oh, I won't forget. I'll remember to do that. And they don't want to, second of all, they don't want to do any extra steps. So writing a to-do list when they think they're going to remember seems pointless to them. So I think in the beginning, we do the to-do list for them. We post it in a way they can't miss it, and it may be pasting it to the door that they leave to go to school in, or it may be pasting it on the middle of the kitchen table when they get home from school. We do that for them, rather than insisting that they make their own. Eventually we can get there. So the step one, you make the to-do list for them. Step two, make it together. Okay, let's go through the things you have to do today. Let's write it down. And step three, gradually have them make the list.
Okay.
And I think as young as possible. I mean, we use picture schedules for kids in preschool and kindergarten. Before they're learning how to read, we create pictures that show how the day is going to go. So I think you can do those, as young as kids understand pictures.
That's great. Yeah. There are two parents on the webinar who are having problems with the very concept of a phone. I think their kids, I'm guessing this is Melinda and another person whose child is 13. They're on the younger end, and their kids are very focused on having a phone, and they're feeling like they're not ready. They're not. It's too much for them. How do you handle that? I mean, I don't know. I think kids are getting phones in Europe at 4 and 5 years old now.
Yeah, and again, I'm old enough, and my kids grew up in, let's see, one graduated from high school in 2000 and the other in 1997. And I remember from middle school on, I had no way of knowing where they were. Right. And I mean, I can remember waiting to pick up my son for something and having no way to contact him because he wasn't there. Right. So to me, I guess I don't have a problem. If I had middle school kids now, I probably would be giving them phones, but I would be establishing the rules for phones.
Yeah, I think that's the issue. The phone, in many ways, is a parental help, but then there's the limiting of the use of it at night. And as you say, that's the problem.
So that makes more sense.
Here's maybe a too general question, but I think you're going to know what this person's getting at, Cheryl. And this is something that so often comes up, and it's basically, do we let our kids fail naturally, which is what we're always told to do, versus are we enabling them by helping them? It's especially complicated when our kids are 3 or more years younger developmentally, or when there's a parent who doesn't understand that, or another child in the household who's immature for their age. I mean, so to what degree do we treat our kids differently? Do we let them fail or not fail? That whole issue, which is so tough for parents.
Yeah, and that's a really good question, because I do think we may go overboard in one direction or the other. I think that's the whole sort of slam against the self-esteem movement, says that, we're giving kids trophies for everything, and that's a problem. On the other hand, I agree with you. It becomes particularly challenging with kids with attention disorders, because they're not, first, because they don't necessarily learn from failure.
Right. Oh, wow. Yeah.
If they learn from failure, then that's great. And everybody should experience some failure. Or so I made a distinction recently when someone asked me that question. I said, well, there's a difference between failure and making mistakes. And everybody should be allowed to make mistakes. But failure has a much stronger emotional feel to it. And so, I try to avoid failure in that sort of big capital letters kind of feel to it. The general rule of thumb that we tell parents and teachers is that our goal is to provide, and listen to this carefully, the minimum support necessary for the child to be successful.
Okay.
So, and there are two pieces.
Not more, not helicoptering. Right.
Exactly. So if you're providing too much support, the kid may be successful, but you've messed up because you want the kid to be successful with minimal support. If you're not providing enough support, then the kid's not going to be successful. So again, it's an art to figure out what's the minimum support necessary. And sometimes they have to make mistakes or fail in order for you to sort that out.
Right.
But it does come down to knowing how to provide the accommodations and supports so the kid isn't being penalized for their attention disorder, but they're also moving towards independence. Because
that's really tough. It's one of the toughest parenting issues, isn't it? I mean,
it really is.
Yeah, you want to help, you want to be there, and yet when do you step back? It's very tough. So let's see. Anne, I'm a single parent. Getting homework done is such a challenge, especially to balance it with some, quote, quality time in the evening. Do you think it's better to get some of the homework done and do something together, or battle to get all the homework done? Oh, that's a tough one.
That's a values choice you have to make.
Yeah. But there are kids who can't get all their homework done. That is something we see, that they just too much homework.
Yeah, absolutely.
At some point, maybe it's too much, if that's an issue.
Yeah, and that's one of the main recommendations I make for 504 plans, accommodation plans, is adjustments in homework load. And I often try to do it informally, if possible, so that it's a communication between the parent and the teacher, where the parent can write in and say, you know what? This just took too much out of us last night, and so this is all we got done.
Right.
And I think parents should be able to make value judgments also about, is there something more important than doing the homework? Another family activity that's more important. That's a harder sell with teachers. I think.
Right.
It's easier if you can say, we spent an hour. This is what we got done. And to build that in, when I say as an accommodation, so that the child is given credit for what they've done, or is graded on what they've done, and not penalized for not finishing it.
Right. Yeah, and you kind of have to hope that you have a teacher who is progressive enough to be flexible and but I think that is a movement nowadays, just to say too much homework. I mean, you shouldn't have to choose between quality time with your child and homework, I don't think.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
No, I agree.
Oh, here's an interesting question. My son has both ADHD and dyslexia, and he resists assistive technology because he doesn't want to be different. So I say things like, when you use the e-reader, your comprehension went from 30% to 90%, but he really doesn't like being different from the other kids. Boy, I understand that one. What's your suggestion on that?
Yeah, that is a tough one, because I totally understand that from the kid's perspective, that he doesn't want to be different, and I understand it from the parent's perspective, because the kid is shortchanging himself by not taking advantage of that. I guess whenever possible, I look for, are there ways he can use technology in an unobtrusive way? Okay. Can he use the e-reader at home when no one's looking at him? Sometimes, for instance, I have kids who won't take extended time on tests because they don't want to be seen as different. So we work out deals with the teacher where, they hand the test in along with everybody else, but then they can come back after school to finish it, or back during a study hall and do it with a guidance counselor. So I guess I would try to be respectful of the kids' need not to stand out, and that's for kids with dyslexia, especially with a combination of dyslexia and ADD. Yeah, and especially by the time they hit middle school, they are so tired of being seen as different, or feeling like they don't work as well. Their brains don't work as well. So, and there may be times when you as a parent have to say, well, optimal academic performance takes a backseat. And just be willing to live with that.
Yeah, that is really tough. I do find that as more and more kids get given extended time, it's kind of better. I wish they would just give up the time constraint issue. There's really no need for it. And
yeah,
I know.
I agree completely.
It's just, It's a couple of interesting questions from people who say that, we've talked a lot about rewards for doing certain activities. And these parents are saying, my child's issue is not doing chores or doing homework or doing things. It's behavior. It's being rude. It's being fresh. It's being oppositional. It's the way they talk to people. what's the strategy for that kind of behavioral modification, if you will? I guess that's not really executive function, is it? I'm not sure what that is.
Well, yeah, it's tied into emotional control. And it's tied into impulse control too, response inhibition, because the attitude comes out without thinking. There are a couple of different ways. One is, if that behavior is primarily being directed towards parents in the home, then my suggestion is ignore it whenever you can. That is one of those pick your battles kinds of things,
right?
Where I just assume that I remember when I was growing up, my mother had pasted something on the inside of her cupboard door when my older brother reached like age 14. And at the time, again, I was only like 11 at the time, so I had no idea what it meant, but I've remembered it ever since. On the inside door of her cupboard, she had put this quote. I don't know where she got it, but it said, "Face it, Ma, mothers are to reject." And clearly that was a reminder to her of, okay, my son is going to say these nasty, mean things to me, and I'm just going to have to live with it because that's the role that mothers play.
Wow. Yeah.
And so I think some of that is swallowing it. You don't want to have a kid walk over you, for sure.
Right.
And you can impose consequences. You can say, when I hear that kind of thing, you're going to take a time out. And when you can apologize for the tone of voice, then you get to come out of timeout. Again, that's one of those pick your battles kinds of things. You can also, there are incentives for that. You can reward kids for making pleasant comments or for one of my favorite, and I don't know whether this would work with middle school kids, but it certainly works with younger kids. So one of my favorite sort of reward systems is putting marbles in a jar. Every time the appropriate target behavior occurs, and when the jar is filled up, then the family gets to do something fun, or the kid gets whatever the reward is, or whatever it is. And that works best when you've identified a couple of target behaviors, like talking nice to your sister, or not talking back, or whatever you can do. But then throwing in bonus marbles for when you catch them being good, doing other things. Right. So the kid never quite knows where that next positive marble is going to come from.
Well, no question that the rewards really work. Here's Rose, who just said she wanted to tell everyone about a short-term goal that really worked for them. Their son hated to read, but really wanted a new Lego set. So they told him that he could earn it by completion of daily reading assignments. And she said he was so focused on getting that Lego set that he now reads way more than his son.
Oh, is
so
that
it's been
cool?
A huge success. Yeah,
that is so wonderful.
Great.
I've even seen, and kids are into Legos. I've even seen kids where they earn the Lego by Lego.
Oh wow! Yeah, marble by marble.
Yeah, that's right. And so, okay, here's the next piece for your Legos, and of course, you need all the pieces to build whatever it is, the Star Wars or whatever it is. So
right.
Yeah, that's great.
Oh, here's Tony recommends, which I have to agree with you, Tony. She says, great book, The Explosive Child by Ross Greene. That is a great book.
That is a great book. Although it's funny, I saw a kid yesterday where the mom actually consulted Ross Greene because she said he can't negotiate. Plan B does not, or basket B does not. Right. That's right. There's no basket B for him. but I particularly like the way. One of the points Ross Greene makes is kids would if they could.
Right.
That whole notion that, when you see, it's not the kids are deliberately acting hard. They can't help it. And we have to keep that in mind when they explode.
Yeah, and his whole point is it's up to you as a parent to see that coming before it's too late and stop it rather than wait until after the explosion occurs. Yeah. I think that's just such a complete eye-opener of a concept to me, when I read about it. Let's see. So many great questions, people. I wish we had another hour. My son, 12 and a half years old, wants the A and is really upset when he doesn't get the A, but he refuses to put forth the effort. Well, that's an interesting question because you do see that disconnect in some kids between, the grandiosity of the ambition of the goal, but they're sort of disconnected from the heart, as you say, the persistence, the goal, the hard work that it takes to get there.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would almost step back and just use reflective listening in situations like this.
Okay.
Gee, you must feel, looks like you're feeling pretty bad because you did an A. And not even, I would then be tempted to say, so why do you think that is? I wouldn't even do that.
Really, just empathy.
Yeah, because sooner or later, you can reinforce effort in other times, but when you're having that conversation about how he didn't get the A, I would really resist the inclination to sort of lecture him and do the cause-effect thing. Well, you didn't get the A because you didn't put in the effort.
Yeah, not very helpful, probably. Won't be heard. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Just sort of empathize. Man, sorry you're feeling so bad about that.
Yeah, okay.
That, and the other thing that happens with some kids, I mean, that happens with kids who are perfectionists too. It's not necessarily related to effort, but they're devastated when they don't get the grade that they want, and that's not healthy either.
Right.
And in fact, I tended to be one of those perfectionists, so I ended up realizing that that's why I enjoy working with ADHD kids, because I find it much easier to try to tune up or ramp up kids with ADD than to ramp down kids with anxiety.
Yeah, no, that's true, isn't it? Yeah. And then there's the kids like my daughter with both, so anxiety and ADHD.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And they do often coexist. Well, we are out of time. I am so sorry, folks, because your questions are just wonderful. And hey, Dawson, you have been so great and so practical and helpful. And I thank you again so much for your time. I hope we can lure you back again.
Yeah, this will be
fun. You're not flying around the world. So see you all soon. Enjoy the rest of this summer. And thanks all for coming. Bye.
For more Attitude Podcast and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.
Ever tried reading while jogging, cooking, or even juggling flaming torches? Yeah, it doesn't end well. But with audiobooks.com, you can conquer books without the circus act. Dive into over 450,000 titles, including more than 10,000 free ones. Get hooked on a bestseller, find your next obsession, or finally read that classic you've been avoiding since high school. And here's the inside scoop. Sign up today for a free 30-day trial and snag your first 3 audiobooks on the house. Sign up for your free trial at audiobooks.com/podcastfree today. That's audiobooks.com/podcastfree.